have a microphone, but no one's ever told me they couldn't hear me very well. So, so anyway, it's a little bit after 2 and we'll get started. I'm going to shut my phone off because I don't think I did. And this is great. This is wonderful. Thank you all for getting here. My goodness, I want to be outside. And I think probably a lot of you all do too, or at home in my greenhouse. But we've got important work to do and things to learn. And we have a great speaker, and you'll go home well informed. And we'll see what happens after that. So Chris is the author of the Swine Republic, and many of you have a copy. There's copies there. Chris will sign books later. When we're over, he has a Substack that I started reading that I have to admit, Chris, I can't read it all the time because it's just too heavy sometimes. But I love the way he writes. It's wonderful. His metaphors, the style of writing is just wonderful. And so if you can handle the subject, then the writing is exquisite. So Chris, I have to say this as a local thing. Our representative in the Senate, in the Iowa Senate, whom I saw yesterday, is Mr. Tom Shipley. And I have to say that, and I think I can say this is the truth, Tom helped get this guy, Chris, fired from his job because he was telling the truth. So as a hydrologist at the University of Iowa Hydrology Lab, there were 2 people that kind of, well, Chris might give you some background on that, but anyway, yeah, we have a local interest in this. So I'm going to, Chris is going to start speaking after I give Jackie Corden a couple of minutes to talk about our co-sponsor, the Southwest Iowa Indivisible. And probably many were you here yesterday at our great rally that we had about 150 people out on the highway. It's like I said to somebody, this is our second day of a successful event, and that's going to we're not going to let that go to our heads though, are we? There's a lot of work to do. So yeah, so Jackie, if you want to come forward and say a few words about Southwest Iowa Indivisible, our co-sponsor for this place.
My name is Jackie Cordone. I've been in Southwest Iowa except for a few years when I was in the Adirondacks. I've been in Southwest Iowa since 1991. And Southwest Iowa Indivisible came into being right after the Trump election in 2016. So 2017, a bunch of us started all going to the same events and organizing and putting on events, and pretty soon we were like, we really need to be an official group. Denise reluctantly became one of us. But when they reached out to Denise, she said immediately, this sounds like a Southwest Iowa Indivisible event, because we are nonpartisan. We are a nonpartisan group. We welcome in others. A lot of what we do rallies. We've been doing stuff since 2017. Protests, rallies, informational pieces. We have done forums. We have done Zoom events with candidates. And we do a lot of voter registration. So you'll notice over there, if you need to check your voter registration, those inactives, they wiped a lot of people out of the system, some people who shouldn't have been wiped out of the system. There's a QR code. I also have it on my phone that you can scan with your phone and look yourselves up. But it's exciting to be here. I've heard Chris before. You guys are in for a treat if you have never heard him speak. And I really urge you to read his book or to put it on your phone, on Kindle, something. Get the book because it is incredible. So thank you for being here. You can also sign up for our news stuff at the sign-in sheets. You can check Indivisible, and that's actually Southwest Iowa Indivisible. We will send you news of future events that we'll be sponsoring. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's yours?
No, not mine.
Okay. So the next guest that we have is Chuck Isenhart. Chuck was in the Iowa legislature until just this last election, and is an incredible, I'm friends with him on Facebook. He's an incredible photographer of birds and nature. And I will let Chuck do a personal or an introduction of himself.
Well, thank you very much. Probably wondered why I'm here. There are maybe a dozen folks that I've known for a long time, working in the natural resource endeavor in the state legislature for 16 years. I met Chris during one of those 4 years. He was a research scientist for the Iowa Soybean Association. They sponsored a bus tour to Webster County, where some of the soybean farmers found out personally and firsthand how they were contributing to the problem, and with some very simple practices, the water they were putting in the stream was cleaner than the stuff going by. That's what I remember about that event. Our paths have crossed many times since. After I left the legislature, I thought about what is my next role, and one of my roles is I'm the director of a group called Dubuque Area Land and Water Legacy. And I have some postcards over here. I won't read it to you, but we're generally involved in education, research, advocacy, and habitat development. We have a wildlife habitat fund that we contribute to every year with a fundraiser. So we sponsor speakers, we organize people. There is some QR codes. That's the way to communicate these days without killing a bunch of trees, I understand. So the card has a link to our Facebook page, to our Habitat Fund. You can sign up for our email list. And most importantly, later, if you want to converse about legislation and public policy, that last one shows you how you as an individual or any group you belong to, or any group you want to make up from scratch, can very easily and simply become a lobbyist in the Iowa State Legislature and start impacting the bills that come up there. But I suggested to Chris that a Western tour like this might be of interest, so we're kind of tag teaming it. I'm really more of a tag along, I guess. But what's happening in the Mississippi River watershed is maybe the same and maybe a lot different than what's happening in the Missouri River watershed. So I wanted to get out here, find out firsthand, see for myself what's happening, hear from folks about what's happening, and maybe use that as a launch pad for some future collaboration between Mississippi River watershed stakeholders and Missouri River stakeholders. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation. If I can add to it later, I'd be happy to do that.
All right, so now we have our main event, Chris Jones, and I know you're all going to enjoy him, so thanks for coming, everybody. This is fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Denise, and thanks everybody for coming today. I apologize if I'm a little travel weary. This is my 5th event in 4 days, and so now then I have to drive 240 miles back home. So Chuck asked me to do this with him this weekend, and I'll just admit I did it a little reluctantly because I am tired of traveling. I did my taxes recently, and last year I drove 7,000 miles to do 34 events, and so I haven't had many this year, and it's been kind of a relief. But I'm very glad that I agreed to do this with Chuck because I don't get west of Des Moines very often. We had a really good crowd yesterday in Sioux City, and there was media coverage of that event, and then yesterday in Council Bluffs we spoke to some really engaged people, and they sat there and sat there and sat there, and I couldn't believe they listened to us for 3 hours, but they did. And so here I am today, and I'm happy to be here today, especially the site of the Nishnabotna fish kill a year ago, and we have a group here that's trying to form to improve the environmental integrity of this area, the Nishnabotna Water Defenders, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. And so I'll dive into my slides, and I'll just warn you, I make no attempt to varnish my language. And so, if I offend someone, I apologize, but it's just my style, and it's what I have built my reputation upon, and so I'll just give you that little nugget first. And so I live about half time in Iowa City, and then I live about half time here, which is DeSoto, Wisconsin. which is right across the river from Lansing, Iowa. And I have a little three-room shack up there, and I go up there when my partner there can't stand me anymore, and she's standing there in the road with her dogs. So that's works out well from a relationship perspective. So yes, I am the author of the Swine Republic. As Denise said, it's over here. I do write a Substack. I post something about weekly. The Substack's also called the Swine Republic. I appreciate the kind words, Denise. If you go, I don't ever paywall anything. And so if you want to subscribe to it and get alerts when I post something, you can. Some of them aren't terrible, I would say. And so you can take a look and see if you like that. And if you do, so be it. If you don't, that's fine too. Yes, ma'am.
Would it be possible for you to move your podium over? Because it, yeah, just a little, well, yeah.
Let me see if I can get this.
He doesn't need the podium. Take down the podium.
I have any cord here.
Chris, can you do it without the podium? Is that too low? I think we can all see better.
How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
You need a chair?
No, I'm good.
If everybody turns their head slightly to the left, this is going to work out. All right, well, just have at her and I'll keep messing around.
I think that's
Enough.
Whenever I talk to people about water quality in Iowa, I always emphasize that to understand our farming systems and water quality and the drivers of impaired water quality, we need to understand Iowa's geological past, and that's one of glaciation. And so we think glaciers have intruded into Iowa 7 times, but there's been 3 main events. The first one, the pre-Illinoisan event where ice covered the state, went all the way down to the present course of the Missouri River. That ended 500,000 years ago. The Illinoisan period where ice came into southeast Iowa, that ended 130,000 years ago. And then the one we talk about the most is the Wisconsin Glacier that was here only 10,000 years ago. And so that's a very recent when you consider that modern human beings have been on Earth for 200,000 years. And so all these ice periods influenced how we farm here in Iowa and affect our water quality. And so everybody knows, I think, this is what Iowa used to be. We had the tall grass prairie, we had the wetlands, and we had the oak savanna, and of course that stuff's all gone, right? We know that. And now we have crops. We have crops over about 75% of our land, about 65% corn and soybean. We still have some forest left in northeast Iowa and south central Iowa, and then we have some pasture in southern Iowa still. And so the really unique thing about Iowa is how much of our land is privately held. Over 97% of our land is in private lands. And so that's a big issue for us as we try to improve the environmental integrity here, because whenever we do something to try to improve things, we're almost always having to work with landowners, with private landowners. And without laws, there's nothing to compel them to do the things that we sometimes want them to do. Prior to settlement, we know the prairie streams here were shallow systems. They were shallow, clear water systems. They spilled out into the floodplain very frequently. We had the perennial plants on the stream banks. The tall grass prairie provided a lot of surface area for the raindrops, and it dispersed the energy of the falling raindrops. We had sands and gravels in the substrate of the stream, so clean water species like smallmouth bass and pumpkin seed sunfish could spawn, and then we had the generalist species of channel catfish. And an important thing to see here in this slide is the water table was very close to the surface of the earth in Iowa. Even in many of the drier places in Iowa, the water table was close to the surface. Then we got here in the 1840s, about the same time John Deere invented the steel plow, and of course, we overturned the prairie, we broke the prairie. And then the other big thing we did is we drained the landscape. And so, if we've been here all our lives, sometimes we forget how wet Iowa really is. Many of our soils are what we call hydric soils, and so they hold on to water really tightly. And so to make many of these areas good for crop production, we had to lower the water table. And so we tiled the land, and you can see those guys in the upper left there in Boone County putting in the old clay tiles. They left gaps in between the sections to let water creep in, and then we built the trapezoidal ditches with the steam shovels. And so we created thousands of miles of streams here in Iowa with these steam shovels, so the field tiles would have a place to discharge. And so now the landscape looks like this in the upper right. Looks a little dark there, but just a field where the water table has been lowered 4 feet, right, to optimize it for corn and soy production. And so we can think of prior to settlement how streams started in Iowa. It would have been a wetland sort of gently overflowing into a stream channel. And now this is how our streams start. This is the Iowa River, the source of the Iowa River, the start of the Iowa River in north central Iowa that flows flows through Iowa City. This is so dark, I'm wondering if I don't suppose there's anything we can do here. Well, we'll just run. So these are, if you can't see, there's a bunch of field tiles dumping into this common spot. And so this is how our streams begin now. And a thing to remember here is across Iowa, that first drop from the start of the stream down to the stream channel is 3 feet. That's the average across Iowa. And so remember, stream might have began as a wetland, sort of gently overflowed into a stream channel. And so we've put 3 foot of head on all our streams right from the get-go. And so all our streams are energized now, okay? The water has more energy from the very beginning. And so this is very difficult to see here, but this is Walnut Creek in Jasper County, and it shows a stream channel in 1930, and it shows a stream channel now. And so the stream channel in 1930 on this stretch was 1,000 meters long. Now it's 500 meters long. But the vertical drop from point A to point B is the same. So we have the same vertical drop, but we've shortened the lateral distance by half. And so what does that mean? It means the water has more energy, right? It has more energy. And when we straighten the stream, we put the spoils of the stream up on the stream banks to act as levees to keep the water out of the cropped fields. And so now our streams erode downward, okay? They erode downward because that water has energy. And so it keeps eating downward, 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 and that's most apparent in western Iowa. And so you drive around the countryside here and you see these streams way down in these canyons. That's not the way they should look, right? And in some cases, they'll erode clear down straight to the bedrock. And so this is Walnut Creek, again in Jasper County. And so these 2 pictures were taken from the same spot. And this is no kidding. That stream can go from the top photo down to the bottom photo and back to the top photo in 24 hours. And so the streams are so flashy now, right? Because we don't have any surface area on the landscape to absorb the raindrops and to disperse the energy. And then with the tiles, okay, the water gets from the fields right to the stream immediately. And so the streams are very, very flashy. And we get a 1-inch rain now, and our streams go bonkers, right? A 1-inch rain can cause a flood on the Raccoon River. That's crazy. That never would have happened 150 years ago. And so then we see in that top photo there, all that black dirt in the stream bank. The first 6 feet of that was all deposited since settlement. It's all eroded from the uplands. And so it's only been there for 100 years. And so that's what we call unconsolidated. And so it's really vulnerable to erosion. When the stream comes up, the stream accesses that and it can scour it away really easily. As a consequence, our streams are always muddy now. Even when it's not raining, our streams aren't clear. So this is western Iowa, and we can see an example of what happens when we straighten a stream. You can see the stream meander there in the lower left, and then the straightened stream channel there, and you can see how the water has just scoured out this huge stream channel after we straighten the stream. And when we straighten a section of a stream, the effects don't stay there, okay? Let's say we only straighten a mile or two. That causes stream bank erosion downstream because the water rushing down during floods overflows the meanders and scours out, a bigger channel. And then we also have stream bank erosion and downcutting that proceeds upstream, okay? We get what's called a head cut that goes upstream. And so if we straighten just a few miles of a stream, it can ruin the whole thing, both downstream and upstream. The other thing we did here, that's especially in western Iowa, that's a big issue, is we straightened the Missouri River. And so this is Mills County here on the left, 1923, in the middle, 1947. On the right there, 1976. And so we cut hundreds of miles of stream length out of the Missouri River. So we could have a shipping industry that really doesn't exist on the Missouri. We very rarely have tows go up the Missouri, and so we could farm the floodplain. Well, now the Missouri is eroding downward, okay? The Missouri is eroding downward, and so the outlets of the tributaries into the Missouri have been destabilized. And so essentially we get a head cut from the Missouri up into the tributaries that proceeds upstream. And so the fact that we straightened the Missouri has really helped ruin our streams here in western Iowa. The Missouri was naturally a muddy water system because as it meandered back and forth across its floodplain, it eroded all that easily erodible lush soil that had been deposited over thousands and thousands of years. Well, that lush soil made it down to the Gulf of Mexico and helped build the wetlands off the coast of Louisiana. And so this, we see here what the sediment load looked like in 1800 going down to the Gulf. You can see that huge amount coming from the Missouri, a tiny amount coming from the upper Mississippi and the Ohio. And then we can see that sediment load in 1980, where the sediment has been cut off from the Missouri, and sediment loading from both the upper Mississippi and the Ohio has increased, but not nearly enough to counteract the loss from the Missouri. And so what has happened? Well, we hear all the time about how the wetlands are eroding down in Louisiana, right? And so the sediment isn't making it down there. Then we have subsidence, which is a sinking of the coastline because of oil and gas extraction. And then we have climate change with rising sea levels. And so as a consequence, all the wetlands are eroding down on the Gulf Coast. And so what we've done up here with our hydrological modification is we have just ruined an ecosystem down in the Gulf Coast, basically. And I say in all our programs, what we have done to the Missouri River is probably the biggest environmental disaster in this country. Also, we could just farm the floodplain and have a few tows come up, once every 3 or 4 months. And it's really quite a tragedy. And so now this is what our streams in Iowa all look like. They're all down in these canyons, right? And if you drove across the countryside and you didn't know any better, you'd think that's what they should look like. We have the tile coming in. We've replaced the perennial plants on the stream bank with 2 annual species, corn and soybean. We've silted in the sands and gravels of the stream bed where the clean water species would spawn. And then we have the pollution tolerant species, the carbon bullhead, and we still have the generalist species, the channel catfish. And the other big thing here is we have lowered the water table. The water table's down 4 feet. And so now we know some of the driest places in a farmed field are the areas right adjacent to the stream, because we've taken the water table down so far, and with the down cutting of the stream, those soils get dried out really readily. At the same time we were transforming the hydrology, we were also transforming our farms. And so we had these diverse farming systems prior to World War II. This is a really famous diagram from an Iowa DNR study. This is a farm in Winnebago County in 1941. We can see a real diversity of land use there. Corn, a little bit of soy, a lot of oats, a lot of alfalfa. We have pasture, we have woodlots, we have wetlands. And then we fast forward to 1976, and we've taken that all down to about 2 species, just corn and soybean. There's a little bit of oats left in 1976, and a little bit of pasture or hay, and that would be gone in the present day, right? And so we've taken these diverse systems and condensed it down to 2 species. Well, you know, nature likes diversity, right? And so where on earth do we see vast areas covered by only 2 species of plants? Nowhere. And so an emphasis I want to make here is we are never going to get the environmental outcomes that we want when we only have 2 species of plants on the landscape. And so now our farming looks like this. We have the clean rows of GMO crops. We have the hog industry. We have 25 million hogs. You can drive across the state and never see a hog, right? Crisscross the state and never see one. We have 25 million of them here. They're all in these buildings up on the horizon. And then we have the ethanol industry. And if you're not from Iowa and you come here and you drive through the state and you see this and you say, wow, that all looks clean. That looks so clean, doesn't it? How could that be bad? How could that produce any pollution? But of course we know that it does, and the 2 main things we talk about are pollution related to soil erosion, and then also nutrient pollution that impairs our waters. We have hundreds of impaired waters here in Iowa. It's most visible in the lakes, I think. I think it's really quite something. You know, I remember, you know, from my childhood going to many of these constructed lakes that were just newly constructed that were pretty nice places. Now they're basically unusable in the summertime, right? If you can find a beach without green water in the summer between Memorial Day and Labor Day, it's unusual. And so all these lakes that we've paid for with taxpayer money are just unusable now because they've all been filled up with sediment and phosphorus. We have over 500 impaired stream lengths. And think about this, 80% of the monitored stream segments in Iowa have been continuously impaired for 10 years or more. 80% of the monitored stream lengths. 43% of our lakes have been impaired for 10 years at least. And we have over 60,000 miles of streams here in Iowa. We have only 15 stream stretches that meet all their designated uses as outlined under the Clean Water Act. It's really a disgrace. And I have people in the legislature will say this whole thing is a hoax. Ken Rosenboom from Mahaska County says this is all a hoax. It's not a hoax. So along with that, we have things like what happened a year ago, right across the street, right? This big spill of fertilizer that killed the Nishnabotna River for 100 miles, clear down into Missouri, into the confluence of the Missouri River. And, you know, I love this. Red Oak Co-op says, warm weekend led to the massive fertilizer. And if anything has exhausted me in my career, it's hearing people in agriculture blame things on the weather. The weather is what it is. We can design our systems to be robust to the expected weather conditions that we have here, or we can not, right? That's a choice. We can design our systems to be robust to the weather, or we can not design it. And so the industry has largely chosen not. We're still waiting for the state to do something, right? Nothing. We hear nothing. You know, New Cooperative is the 11th biggest ag retailer, the 11th biggest ag retailer in the United States. In the United States, the 11th biggest, between 2 million and 100 billion, or between 200 million and 1 billion in sales they have. And so they're allowed by our state to kill an entire river, to kill a river with no action. You know, it's disgraceful. You know, where is the outrage? One thing I emphasize with people is we have a problem of scale here. And so we have this idea that, well, if we could just get the farmers to do this, that, and the other thing, and put a Band-Aid on these 10 acres and a diaper on these 20 acres, that the water will get better. And I want to tell you that is not the case. We have a problem of scale here that we need to talk about. We have all our land in crops. We have 11,000 square miles of our land are used to produce corn for ethanol. So we have 99 counties. Imagine 20 of those counties, every square inch of 20 counties being used to grow corn to produce ethanol. That's what we do. We have all the hogs. We have 4 million beef cattle. We're the #1 egg state. We have 5 million turkeys, 4 million broiler chickens, and quarter million dairy cattle. And so can we get the environmental outcomes that we want when we're producing at this scale? I would suggest to you that we can't. We hear the industry tell us all the time that they've improved greatly in soil erosion. Well, the truth of the matter is we did improve a lot from 1985 until 2000. What happened in 1985? We had conservation compliance in the Farm Bill. And so if farmers wanted to participate in the federal commodity programs, they had to have a soil conservation plan. So it was a law. It worked. We saw a pretty immediate improvement in the clarity of Iowa streams in the years after 1985. We have not seen an improvement since 2000 in soil erosion here. Soil erosion is still bad. The average across Iowa is about 5 tons per acre. You can see the dark red and purple is where the worst erosion occurs. We're still the worst state in the United States for soil erosion. And you can see the top 7 or 8 right there. And so we still have issues with soil erosion. You see farmers that are doing a lot, with soil erosion. You see a lot of no-till in this part of the state, especially on soybeans. And so driving down here from the interstate, I saw quite a lot of corn stubble in the fields. And so bear in mind, a lot of these fields are no-till in the soybean cycle and then tilled in the corn cycle, but still, there's a lot of farmers that aren't getting the memo, right, about soil erosion. All this has led to issues with our drinking water. We have 7,000 wells in Iowa that are polluted with nitrate above the EPA's limit of 10. about 25% of us drink water. It's been treated for nitrate removal. We have about 60 public water supplies that are removing nitrate during the treatment process. This has led to some concern of late. Minnesota environmental groups petitioned EPA to have them force their state agencies to address nitrate in drinking water in the southeast part of the state. Wisconsin has a big issue with nitrate in their drinking water. If anything, I think Wisconsin's groundwater is probably worse than ours here when it comes to nitrate. And Iowa Environmental Council has also petitioned EPA the way Minnesota did, the people in Minnesota did. You know, it seems unlikely now with this administration that that's going to go anywhere, but I guess we'll see. And so the IEC petition focused primarily or strictly on northeast Iowa, where we have really vulnerable groundwater wells and aquifers, because we have thin topsoils, fractured limestone bedrock, and so the pollutants can get down to the aquifers really quickly. And so the industry has really painted this drinking water thing as a Des Moines thing, right? And so we heard Terry Brandshead say Des Moines declared war on rural Iowa over the lawsuit, and all the ag media, when they talk about this, it's always, you know, with regard to Des Moines. The truth is, Des Moines has the capacity to cope with this problem. I worked there, I know. I worked at the waterworks. And so the people of Polk and Dallas County have the means to cope with this from a financial perspective. The waterworks has highly trained and, you know, the best people in the water business working there. They know how to deal with this. The truth is, the burden of this nitrate pollution falls upon people in rural Iowa. Okay? If you live in a town of 2,000 people and your well is contaminated with nitrate, that's a burden, right? That's a burden. It can cost you $1 million to drill a new well. And so that's one thing that never enters the discussion, and the politics of all this is really frustrating to me, because we hear about the Democrats can't make any inroads with rural Iowa anymore. You know, the brand is ruined in rural Iowa. Well, this is a bread and butter public health issue for rural Iowa. Why does the Democratic Party not push these environmental issues and demonstrate that these are burdens for rural people? These health consequences of having nitrate and other things in our drinking water, we've known about them for a long time, okay? But we never hear our elected people or our policy people talk about it. This paper, published 24 years ago, associating drinking water nitrate with bladder cancer in postmenopausal women. This paper, 21 years ago, children living within 1 mile of a CAFO have double the asthma risk. 15 years ago, positive associations between drinking water nitrate above 5 parts per million. Remember the EPA limit is 10, so this is half the limit. Positive associations between drinking water nitrate and thyroid cancer. 12 years ago, mothers drinking water with more than 5 parts per million nitrate double the risk of giving birth to a baby with birth defects. 11 years ago, drinking water with nitrate over 3, and almost every person in this room drinks water above 3 at sometime during the year. Double the risk of ovarian cancer in women. 9 years ago, 1.6 times elevated risk of bladder cancer, drinking water over 5 parts per million nitrate. 9 years ago again, living within 1 mile of a CAFO doubles your risk of an antibiotic-resistant staph infection. This is Wisconsin. Every year, between 100 and 300 cases of those cancers shown there related to drinking water nitrate. And so a lot of these studies, the threshold is 5 milligram per liter nitrate, right? How many people in Iowa drink water with that much nitrate? Almost 1 million people, okay? Almost 1 million people. You can go years in Des Moines and never take a drink of water that has less than 5 parts per million nitrate. Then we hear this story come out about a year ago that we have double the cancer rate, and we're the only, we have the highest cancer rate, and we're the only state where the cancer rate is increasing. And so, you know, this got some news, right? This got some news. And so I can tell you there's a real reticence out there to talk about this cancer thing in the context of agriculture. There certainly is a lot of reticence. One of the public water supplies removing nitrate in the treatment plant is at the University of Iowa. The University of Iowa has its own water treatment plant that supplies water to campus and to the hospital. In terms of the number of people that drink the water, it's one of the biggest water utilities in the state. Okay? It's there because they train engineers about water, drinking water treatment and other things in that treatment plant. Well, a few years ago, they had to purchase nitrate removal for the treatment plant. The treatment plant uses the Iowa River. The Iowa River has high nitrate. They had to have RO because they were violating the nitrate standard for their customers, which is about 30,000 people. But yet, during our football games, what do we do at the end of the first quarter, right? We turn and we wave to all the kids in the hospital. And do we ever think why some of those kids might be in there? Right? We do not. And then these are the drinking fountains at Kinnick Stadium. Okay? We have the Iowa corn growers sponsor the drinking fountains at Kinnick Stadium. You know, how perverse is this? The university's water treatment plant has to install nitrate removal at taxpayer expense. We have the hospital, the hospital, the children's hospital with all the cancer patients. And then we let the corn growers sponsor the drinking fountains. You know, where is the outrage here? You know, where is the outrage? You know, this intrusion into our institutions, honestly, it's part of the problem in not being able to make progress. We've let the industry intrude into our institutions. We've let them spread their propaganda using taxpayer-funded institutions. It's a disgrace, in my opinion. At the same time, we have the land-grant institution to the west, in Ames, doing stuff like this. And they just published a paper saying the optimum nitrogen fertilizer rate for maize in the U.S. Midwest is increasing. This was Iowa and Illinois. And so they're endorsing an increased nitrogen fertilizer rate to corn. ISU put out a big news release about this. It was in Nature, you know, celebrating the paper. And the thing that it didn't tell you was this. These are graphs from the paper. On the left here is corn yields over time. The blue line is corn in rotation with soybean. The red line is continuous corn. And we can see the slope of the line on these yield increases over time is 1.2 and 1.4%. Then the graph on the right is N loss from the fields. We can see that's increasing also. That's increasing. The slope of the line there is 2.8% and 2.3%. And And so essentially, the pollution is increasing at double the rate that the yields of corn are increasing. And so as we try to squeeze every last bushel of corn out of this land, you know, we disproportionately increase the pollution, right? Do you think ISU wants to tell us that? No, they don't. You have to dig into the paper and find that out for yourself. Do you think the researchers want to tell you that? No, they don't. So how much are we generating here in terms of pollution at the continental scale? Well, 31% of our land here in Iowa drains to the Missouri, 69% drains to the upper Mississippi. Missouri River Basin's huge, right? It goes all the way to the Continental Divide. We have 3.3% of the land in the Missouri Basin. We contribute 55% of the nitrate to the Missouri River from 3.3% of the land. The upper Mississippi River Basin, we have 21% of the land. We contribute 45% of the nitrate. And then down at the Gulf, we have 4.5% of the land. We contribute 29% of the nitrate and 15% of the phosphorus. The state's flagship water quality policy to deal with this is the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. We had a science assessment more than 10 years ago now, actually 15 years ago now, it began, that determined the best practices that would keep nitrate on farm fields and out of the streams. Those practices are eligible for cost share. Farmers want to implement them. The science assessment determined that to implement those would cost between $2 and $10 a pound to keep that pound of nitrogen out of the stream. So let's say an average is $6. So it costs the taxpayer $6 to keep it out of the stream. The farmer can buy it today for about 50 cents. So 50 cents to buy it, $6 to keep it out of the stream. How is that going to work? You know, that is not going to work in any long-term economically sustainable way. Our average statewide stream nitrate load is about 600 million pounds per year. The goal of the nutrient strategy is to reduce that 45%. 45% would be 270 million pounds. And so at that $2 to $10 a pound, that's 540 million to 2.7 billion per year. We are never going to have that amount of money, right? It's a fantasy. Our elected leaders are lying to us about this, that this is going to solve the problem. It's not. The entire budget for the University of Iowa, the entire amount of money the University of Iowa gets from the state of Iowa is on the order of $220 million. Okay, to put it in perspective, that's 2.7 billion up to just to do nitrate, just nitrate. So I'm gonna see it. So what would work? Well, we know for a certainty if we had more diverse farming systems, it would give us better environmental outcomes. And so that's Matt Liebman. He's a friend of mine. He's retired from Iowa State. He spent his career studying these extended rotations where farmers would grow a year of corn, a year of soy, 1 year of oats, 2 years of alfalfa, versus the 2-year rotation of corn and soybean. And so the extended rotation, 5-year rotation, 91% less fertilizer was used, 97% less herbicide. And so even though we almost entirely eliminate herbicide, the wheat biomass was similar in the two systems. Soybean health was better, soil health was better, tile nitrate was 57% lower in the extended rotation. So remember, the goal of the nutrient strategy was a 45% reduction. Here we get a 57% reduction, and it costs the taxpayer no dollars. Okay, no dollars. soil erosion cut in half, fossil fuel use 60% lower, but the net returns to the farmer were similar. The revenue was lower in the extended rotation, but the input costs were also lower. And so why don't we do this, right? And so that's, the answer to that is complicated. You know, we probably don't have the infrastructure at the state level to support that extended rotation. For instance, oats. Everybody wants to talk about oats these days.
Yeah, I believe you said that Quaker Oats is getting their oats from China.
So that's where I'm going with this. So 20 miles from my house is the world's largest oat mill. World's largest oat mill. Uses 2 million pounds of oats per day. All their oats come from Canada. So they all come in from Canada by rail. They won't even buy Iowa oats. They won't even buy it. And so, you know, why can't we develop policy, right, that would incentivize the production of oats and the use of oats here, right here, in a plant that's right in the state of Iowa. And so this introduces an opportunity. If you haven't heard, we have these things called tariffs, right? And so oats just became 25% more expensive. And somebody told me, and I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody told me the last couple days, Fox News is running stories now about how oats are bad for you. Just what world are we living in here? I don't know. But we can force every gas station in the state of Iowa to sell E15 blended gasoline. You know, why can't we create policy that would incentivize the production of some of these other crops? Sure, I know farmers need markets, you know. You can't grow something unless you have a market where you can sell it. And I'm really sympathetic to that. But, you know, we need policy. We need policy people to talk about this. But do you think anybody at Cargill in Minneapolis or ADM in Decatur, Illinois, or, you know, Koch brothers in Wichita, Kansas, do you think any of them want Iowa farmers growing oats? Of course they do not, right? And who has control of our political process now? Of course they do. The other thing I say all the time, and this always isn't great for a headline, and I noticed Sioux City used me yesterday. We have got to get rid of ethanol. We just have to if we're ever going to get the environmental outcomes that we want here. We hear all the time about how young farmers can't break into the business because of land prices. And, you know, the line from Farm Bureau is that, well, all the public land that we have, all 2% of the state's area, competes with farmers, you know, and drives up the price of land. Well, the price of land has been driven up by the renewable fuel standard. And so we can see that the average price of an Iowa acre of farmland has increased in lockstep with the amount of ethanol produced in this country. So we created a guaranteed market for corn, right? When we created a guaranteed market for corn, we increased the value of the capital that was used to produce that corn. I mean, it's economics 101. It's what we could have easily predicted back in 2005 when we did that. You know, and think about this. The calories that we plow into corn ethanol exceed the caloric requirements of the entire U.S. population. So we're putting more of our agricultural production into fuel ethanol than what we're putting into our bodies. It's perverse. I use that word a lot, perverse. You got a synonym for that, and I'm all ears. Ethanol also creates perversity elsewhere in U.S. agriculture. When I was growing up, the High Plains, that was wheat country, right? Now it's corn country. We're sucking the Ogallala Aquifer dry to irrigate corn. It takes 6,000 years to replenish it. Why are we doing that? It's because we have ethanol plants in western Kansas and western Nebraska, making ethanol with irrigated corn. How sustainable is that? It's bizarre that we would think that this is a good thing. We all hear about the Colorado River going dry and how Los Angeles and Phoenix and Las Vegas are going to run out of water. Half of the Colorado River goes to irrigate alfalfa, half of it. And then that alfalfa is exported to China and Saudi Arabia. Again, how sustainable is that? We could grow alfalfa here without irrigation, right? We could grow it here without irrigation. Well, why are we growing it in a desert and not growing it here? It's because of the renewable fuel standard that creates this guaranteed market for corn. And we hear the industry talk about how there's a greenhouse gas benefit to using ethanol in their cars. There isn't. This paper published by the researchers at the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences shows a 24% increase in greenhouse gas emissions with blended ethanol versus just unblended gasoline. So part of the deal here is today with the Nishnabotna Water Defenders, and so I thought I'd talk a little bit about the driftless water defenders and sort of the evolution of how that whole thing happened.
You have arrived.
I've always dreamed of that. So this is what we call the driftless area, the 4 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, and this is where my shack is right here. So it's a unique area. It's this donut hole in the Corn Belt where the geology is completely different. The hydrology is completely different. The farming systems resemble the farming systems of 70 or 80 years ago in the rest of Iowa. You have many more small farms up there. Almost all of them have, or I shouldn't say almost all of them, a lot of them have livestock of some sort, but not CAFOs, okay? And so you still have some small dairies, you still have some beef cattle on pasture, not a lot of hogs. And so that's the driftless area. And so we know the driftless area is really vulnerable to environmental contamination. And again, that's because of the hydrology. We have shallow topsoils, and then we have fractured limestone bedrock, and so pollutants get dissolved on their way down to the bedrock, and they get out to the bedrock, which commingles with the streams, and so the pollutants get into the streams really easily. This graph here on the y-axis is nitrate loss. On the x-axis is the percentage of land in a watershed that is cropped. And so, and when we look at each one of those dots is a watershed. And we know that nitrate loss correlates with row crop fraction in a watershed almost in a linear way. Okay, you can see that there, how we have that cluster of watersheds there. And then we have these other 3 oddballs up here where we have very high nitrate loss with a small row crop fraction, only about 50%. Well, that's Northeast Iowa. That's the Upper Iowa, that's the Turkey, and that's the Yellow Rivers. And so we have a lot of vulnerabilities in Northeast Iowa. At the same time, we really don't have many CAFOs up there. And so there is livestock up there, not many hogs though. But a lot of Iowa's gotten filled up with CAFOs. And so it's getting hard to find places to put the manure. So if you want to open up a new livestock operation in northwest Iowa, you're going to have a hard time finding fields to apply the manure. And so the livestock industry sees an opportunity in northeast Iowa. They can get land for cheap because a lot of it's not very suitable for cropping. And so we see a movement where people want to expand in northeast Iowa. And so that has been in the news, especially with this, what's now called the Supreme Beef cattle operation on just west of Marquette, Iowa, right there on Highway 18. You can see it from the highway. And so the whole thing started in 2017, what was then called Walls Energy. And so there were two groups of investors, the energy guys, the cattle guys. There was going to be a digester there at the operation. It was going to receive the manure, it was going to digest it, they were going to capture the natural gas that came off and either sell it to a utility or bottle it. And because of that, DNR initially permitted the facility as an industrial wastewater treatment facility. And so that's going back 8 years now. There were going to be, and there is, 11,000 cattle there. They started having problems from the very beginning during construction. They polluted Bloody Run Creek twice. Bloody Run Creek is a trout stream. It has a self-sustaining trout stream. DNR fined them twice, $10,000. Then there was a falling out between the energy guys and the cattle guys. And the energy guys were actually from Iowa City. And there was a lawsuit, and then the facility was renamed without the digester now as Supreme Beef. Well, without a digester now, they needed a nutrient management plan. Where were they going to put all the undigested manure? And so that was a problem because there's not a lot of crop acres around there. Okay? There's not a lot of places to put the manure. So this was 2019. I wrote a piece on my university blog about this whole thing. That was the title. It's a chapter in my book now. In 2020, a committee to save Bloody Run was formed by the Sierra Club, Trout Unlimited, and some citizen groups up there to try to get in front of this nutrient management plan. In the meantime, the program that I manage at the University of Iowa was a water sensor program. We had water sensors deployed across the state of Iowa. 2 of them were on Bloody Run Creek. One was down at the Highway 18 bridge, and one was within about a mile of the cattle operation up in the headwaters of the stream. Well, Supreme Beef was having trouble getting their nutrient management plan pushed through DNR. And then in the news, we saw that Dan Zumba, senator in the legislature, had called DNR over this and tried to lean on them to get the permitting process expedited. We also found out at that time that Supreme Beef was owned and operated by his son-in-law. A little nugget there. So DNR approved it. So Zumba leaned on it, DNR approved it. So Sierra Club sued DNR over this and said, you know, this is not right. The nutrient management plan was not constructed properly, and they sued. The people up in northeast Iowa, the Bloody Run Creek people, they filed an ethics complaint against Zumba. And the Senate Ethics Committee let him off, including many Democrats. And, you know, you can look up who's contributing to his political campaigns. There they are, right? April of 2023, 2 years ago, my boss comes to me and says, the university lobbyist was approached by two states legislators saying, we gotta do something about you and your writing or some funding for the, in the College of Engineering was gonna be in peril. And so the two guys were Dan Toomba and Tom Ship. And so at that time, I told him, look, me writing my stuff is not worth other people losing their jobs. I was willingly going to stop. And at that time, I just explored whether or not I should retire, and I did retire. And so I was not fired. I just want, for the record, I was not fired, but some events helped me make my decision. So just a week or two after that, Zumba sponsors a bill in the legislature to defund the water quality sensor network. Okay, remember the two water quality sensors are up there in Bloody Run Creek, downstream from his son-in-law's cattle operation. It passed, signed by the governor. And then, at this point, I told my boss, I said, this is such a brazen abuse of power that I thought, we just need to talk about this. And he was not very enthusiastic about talking about it all, but, I did. I opened up, and a lot of news stories were written about this whole thing. And I think back, 2 years and thinking about how outrageous this was at the time. And then I see what's going on now, which just really dwarfs this whole thing. But at the time, I really was very disgusted with my home state and the politics here and the way things were playing out. But as it turns out, Trout Unlimited and Sierra Club were successful. A judge overturned the nutrient management plan and sent the whole thing back to DNR. Then Supreme Beef, they hired this guy's wife, Mike Sexton, who's in the legislature. She's got a company that writes these nutrient management plans. She wrote one up for Supreme Beef. DNR approved it. The cattle were in, 11,000. So this past February, the Bloody Run people tried a new tactic here, and that was to oppose the renewal of Supreme Beef's water use permit. And so they have two wells up there. They have a permit for 25,000 gallons per day each to water the cattle. And so right in Iowa code, it says that DNR must consider the public benefits and the environmental outcomes that will result if they approve these water use permits. DNR has, by their own admission, I was an expert witness in the hearing with the administrative law judge. I was there. By their own admission, DNR had said they had never done this. They had never used that as a consideration, even though it's right in Iowa code. And so, so this went to the judge. It took him 9 months to decide, but he found in favor of the plaintiffs here. Said, sent it back to DNR, said, yes, you need to consider the environmental outcomes of issuing the water use permit. The plaintiffs had argued that if the permit was renewed, that water was going to go through the body of a cow, and eventually it would pollute the streams and aquifers in the area. The judge agreed. So he sent it back to DNR. So the findings of an administrative law judge are not binding. And so just prior to this, the lawyer in that case is a guy named Jim LaRue. He is used to be chief of staff when Chet Culver was governor. He lives in Iowa City. He asked me about what I thought of forming this group and would I be the president of the group, the Driftless Water Defenders. And, you know, our mission can be summed up in 3 words: educate, advocate, and litigate. And so if we feel we can achieve something by suing somebody, we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. And so I agreed to be the president of the group, and still am today, and this story doesn't end yet. And so, in January, we petitioned DNR. We held a public event in Decorah, a petition signing event, to petition DNR to reject the Spring Beef Water Use Permit renewal. Well, DNR gave it to them anyway. Despite our petition, despite the administrative law judge ruling, DNR gave them the permit anyway, and we're appealing that and still awaiting future rulings on that. So there that is. So we've got 2 other things in the works up there. There's a big manure digester that they're trying to build in the western part of Winnebago County, near the town of Ridgeway. There's a dairy there that has 850 dairy cattle. They want to put in 2 of these digesters and then expand their herd up to 10,000. And so the thing about these digesters is this: it makes it easier for the farmer to handle the manure. Okay, but it does not reduce the nutrient content of it. Okay? It makes it easier to handle, but does not reduce the nitrogen and phosphorus content. And so if they use a digester to expand the herd, right, it's going to expand the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's out there on the landscape that will pollute the streams and aquifers. And so we've seen this in Wisconsin. Sort of the ground zero for these digesters is Door County, which is that thumb of Wisconsin that sticks out into Lake Michigan. And so big dairy industry there, there's been a lot of installment of these digesters, and the water in Green Bay there is as bad as it's ever been, worse than it's ever been. All the groundwater up there is contaminated. And so these digesters are not a strategy to improve water quality. So we've done a number of different things to try to get in front of this thing. And then the last thing here is we're suing the Agristar plant in Decorah, in Postville. And you've probably heard of this place. It was the site of the big immigration bust, 20 years ago now. They have been violating the terms of their NPDES permit month after month after month, year after year. For years, they've been discharging more pollution than what they're permitted to discharge into the Yellow River. Yellow River is a trout stream. It's the longest trout stream in Iowa. It's impaired. Excuse me. DNR will not act. They won't act. It's entirely within their authority to act on this situation. They won't do it. The guy that owns this Agristar is this big oligarch guy in Iowa. He's this real estate tycoon. He's a billionaire many times over, of course, right? And they won't act to stop this pollution. So we've sued in federal court to get somebody to do something about this. And so I'm at the end here. I show this map at the end of all my programs. You can't see it too good, but all of the Huck 8 watersheds in Iowa are on there. We have 56 of them. Average area of 1,000 square miles each. About 6 or 7 years ago, I got a whim that I would look at what the livestock populations were in each of these watersheds and look at the amount of fecal matter waste that was being generated by those animals, and then converted that to a human equivalent, okay? And so I did that, and then I looked at place names across the world that, matched my human equivalent population, and I dropped them onto the map. And, anybody that I worked with would know what this map is gonna look like in sort of an abstract way. And so the fact that this became probably the most significant thing I did in my career still is kind of astonishing to me, but, this is what I call a picture is worth 1,000 terms. So it's in the book, and there's the book, and that's all I have, and I'm sure we'll have time for questions and discussion. I don't know. I'm gonna go now.
Give Chris a quick chance to get a drink, because you heard his voice starting to crack a little bit there. If you didn't know before, you know now that Chris is a unique breed of animal, unique breed of scientist. He not only does the due diligence and gets the facts and can communicate them effectively, but he also explores their public policy implications. And he gets out there and talks about what needs to get done, and so that science doesn't go to waste. That's very unusual, especially these days. Science is being attacked across the board. We need more people like Chris, as he suggested. Our public institutions don't particularly support that. We also heard that our state legislature doesn't support it. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily where the progress is gonna come in the near future. I think the progress is gonna come from local efforts like you're talking about, local efforts like Chris talked about in Northeast Iowa. And I think once you mobilize yourselves, you can then turn back to policymakers and say, we don't expect you to be our knights in shining armor to rescue us. We can rescue ourselves, but here's what you need to do to put your shoulder to the wheel as a member of our community with us. So I just wanted to leave you with that quick message. If there's any discussion about legislation and things that have gone on at that level, I'd be happy to participate in that discussion. Water quality is really not on the agenda of your state legislature. Chris pointed out that our flagship water quality policy is the nutrient reduction strategy. It's not designed to clean up our water. It's designed to try to keep the pollution on the land where it was put in the first place. And it's now embedded in state code. Legislature never debated it. We don't debate it. We just occasionally decide to put some money into it. And it's totally up to the Secretary of Agriculture to decide if and when it needs to get changed, and based on his own propaganda, whether or not it's actually achieving any goals. So the legislature, by design, is not engaged in a substantive way on water quality issues. And so that's kind of a structural barrier for Democrats and even Republicans who want to make a difference to try to do it at that level. That's why we need support of community groups like yours. It's one of the reasons I'm engaging in my county through a nonprofit group of like-minded individuals. So be happy to collaborate with you in any way we can to share information and experiences and mutual support. Questions for Chris?
Yes, Mike.
The backdrop for me of the whole thing is that all the subsidies and all the damage being done to Iowans and their lands, and especially small towns. I keep reading in the Des Moines Register, the farmers are losing money on corn and pigs. Is that true?
So there's not much money in hogs right now, that's for sure. I don't have any statistics on that. And the price of corn is not high either. And so I think without, the ARC PLC program, certainly it'd be impossible to grow corn right now. And so, this is nothing new really. I mean, the history of agriculture in the United States is overproduction, and especially so for the 5 big crops, which are corn, soy, wheat, rice, and I think peanuts maybe, I can't remember. And so every country does this, right? Every westernized country subsidizes their agriculture in some way, and it has created overproduction, and it creates pollution. And so pollution is a very predictable outcome of government incentivizing agricultural production. And so one of the things I say quite often, and I haven't said this weekend, is what kind of system do we want? Do we want a system that's designed for commerce, or do we want a system that's designed for human nutrition and environmental outcomes? And I think almost every consumer out there would say we want the second thing, right? But what do we have? We have a system that's designed for commerce. And so as a result, this overproduction is very financially beneficial for a few people. Yes, farmers do benefit, but look who is reaping the great benefits of all this. It's not necessarily the farmer. Yeah, they're staying in business, and most of them get to do what they love and earn a decent living doing it, but the real benefactors of all this are the billionaires. Yes.
And what percentage of Iowa are considered farmers or producers?
We have 85,000 farmers in Iowa, and so that's really kind of a misleading number because the way USDA defines a farmer is anybody that is generating income from more than 10 acres. And so we have a lot of people that are farming, you know, just 10 or 15, 20 acres that our government calls them farmers. Clearly, it's not. You're not able to earn a living farming at that scale, at least corn and soybeans. We have about 20,000 farmers that control about 60% of our land. And so that's the real important number. And so, you know, these are people that are farming, in some cases, many thousands of acres. And when we talk about conservation, it happened yesterday. I had a person at the program, a conservationist, said, I'm really excited because I have a lot of farmers that are talking about soil health and regenerative agriculture. Well, that very well may be true, but those types of farmers typically are not farming 5,000 acres. You know, and this is a big problem. If you're farming 5,000 acres, you don't have time to fart around with stuff like cover crops. And many times you don't have time to mess around with no-till, or you know, you don't like driving around wet spots in your wheat field, so you just farm right through them. Or you don't like having to contend with a buffer along this little creek that goes through your property. And so I had a farmer flat out tell me one time, you can't do conservation when you have a 54-row planter. And you laugh, but think about it. You see these things, how big they are, right? And so you have no, you know, you have no flexibility when you're out in the field with this big equipment. And so, and these are the farmers that control policy. So, yes.
I think you've hit on one of the key points with any of these discussions that anyone's having in this area, and that's pretty much the mythology of what agriculture is today. Whenever we see a news report or anything else, they show a broken down farm with 6 pigs and 3 goats, and they say this is the farm community and they're really being damaged. That's not who's farming. And that's until we realize, my family settled here in 1868 and I live in the same house. There's been a few changes since then. And it doesn't resemble anything like that until Iowa recognizes that when we talk about farmers, we're talking about corporations. There are lots of small family farms. They haven't been able to live for 40 or 50 years successfully. They hold on by fingertips. The only people, what you said, corporate America is the only person making money off of agriculture. And the few that are left that are actually farming at a small scale are barely sharecroppers at this point. So we've got to change the conversation completely about who we're dealing with when we try to pass laws. We're not dealing with Uncle Grandpa.
Yeah.
We're dealing with major corporations. We need to go after the corporations.
And those were the stewards of the land. the grandpas, the smaller farms.
So I talk about this a lot, that this mythology of the family farmer or the farmer, and just this culture of agriculture that we are proud of here. And so almost everyone that grew up here has some tie to farming in some way. And so, you know, in my book, I kind of characterize that as, you know, Harold, right? I call all the farmers all Harold. And so we all love Uncle Harold, right? And he sends us $20 on our birthday, and he's always been nice to us. And none of us really want to do anything that's going to upset Uncle Harold. And so this is part of this whole mythology thing that the industry really exploits, right? And they exploit and they plant this idea in our mind of the rugged agrarian out on the prairie, eking out a living against all odds, against the weather and the markets and the barons and all that, when that's not what it is anymore. And so, you know, part of that is, and I firmly believe this, is we need some sort of land reform. And so, you know, we have, it's clear that you're able to take care of the land in a more sustainable way if the amount that you're farming is less. That is apparent. And so we need some sort of land reform here. We have 60% of our land that's rented. Who are the people that own this land? Well, there's widows in nursing homes, but there are also people sitting in offices in Chicago and Des Moines and Omaha and Minneapolis. And we need to get that land out of their hands. We need them to divest of that land and get it into the hands of people that want to farm it sustainably. Now, I get that the devil is in the details there, but we at least need to have that discussion.
I'm gonna have that to be the last, I'm sorry, because we've got another meeting that's gonna follow this. And I wanna beg to differ about the widows in the nursing homes. How many women out here are landowners?
I didn't say they were all.
I know. And I've worked with an organization that's worked for years on women on the land to become empowered, you know. But anyway, I'd like to call this, Chris is gonna be over here, you can ask him questions over here. We all sort of need to stand up and move around, and I wanna thank you, Chris.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Everyone to get a drink or go to the bathroom or whatever.